What is up, guys? Welcome to my review for Arrow Season 8, Episode 7, titled Purgatory. Now, this episode, just like this week's episode of The Flash, has a lot to live up to and a lot to do. This episode shares its title with what is widely considered to be the best episode of Arrow ever, Season 5, Episode 23, titled Lian Yu, because Lian Yu is the Mandarin translation of Purgatory and vice versa, so it had to live up to that, kind of. I mean, not really, but there is a little bit of that to that. It's also the last episode before the Crisis, kind of the mid-season finale, as not counting the Crisis episode, it is the last episode of the year, so it's kind of the mid-season finale, but also it is the last regular episode of Arrow. There's 3 more episodes: the crossover episode, the backdoor pilot to Green Arrow and the Canaries, and the series finale. So this episode can be considered to be the last regular episode of Arrow ever. So with all those things, it had a lot to live up to, a lot to do, and for the most part, it accomplishes that. So in this review, or in this video, I'll be reviewing the last episode of Arrow, or what we can say is basically the last regular episode of Arrow, Purgatory. Also very similar to The Flash this week, this episode takes place right after the end of the last episode, so this could have been a 2-parter, either Reset Part 1 or 2, or Purgatory Part 1 or 2, or maybe the final Green Arrow story Part 1 or 2. Honestly, that would have been really cool, but this episode begins right where the last episode left off, with Team Arrow on Lian Yu. Oliver has this scene with Mia and William, where he tells them about the fact that he's gonna die. I don't know if I missed something, but I was pretty certain they already knew this, because he was dead in the future. Maybe they just didn't know when he was gonna die or how soon, because in their timeline it seemed like it was in 2024, or maybe in some different thing completely. Maybe this is like a completely different timeline where they were from. The Crisis never happened, or I mean it did, but Oliver didn't die during that Crisis. There was something else that killed him. But then again, the whole scene with Felicity and the Monitor, honestly, it's a little bit confusing, but this is a good scene. However, Mia's reaction and her attitude the rest of the episode, except for like near the end, it's not great. I thought that after that episode where Mia and Oliver bonded a little bit, and Mia thought that she can get closer to Oliver, I thought then that attitude would go away, but it didn't in this episode. And while that was resolved at the end of the episode with William telling Mia that what she's doing here, being mad at Oliver, is just not the right thing to do at this point, which I guess in that regard it is shown as a character flaw, but at the same time it's a little bit frustrating how we've been through this already, and Mia had all those whiny, annoying moments where she's angry at Oliver for saving the multiverse over spending time with her, which, again, they did resolve in this episode, but at the same time, during the actual scenes, it was very frustrating. So that's one thing, or probably the only thing in this episode I didn't love. So Diggle talks to Lila about the Monitor, and I think it was in this scene where we learned that Lila was not raised by the Monitor at all. In the comics, Lila was a baby where she was shipwrecked and lost at sea. The Monitor saved her and raised her as his daughter. In this continuity, the Monitor saved her when she was a lot older, and I don't really think there's going to be a father-daughter dynamic in that regard, because Lila was a regular person raised by regular people who went to the military, was supposed to die in some sort of mission in Afghanistan, but the Monitor saved her. So yeah, I do think that father-daughter dynamic probably won't be in this crossover, which is a shame. I think that was something that they could have explored and could have been pretty cool. And also for Lila to have been working with the Monitor this entire time, which I think she still has like before Arrow, but she wasn't raised by him, so it's a little bit less time. Either way, this was a pretty good scene, with Diggle still believing that the Monitor is bad, and continuing to believe so for a big portion of this episode, which makes me ask the question why he wasn't put in the Reset universe. Oliver was there, Laurel was there, but at the end of it, they were both convinced that the Monitor was good, so why wasn't Diggle put there? My answer for that, or my immediate assumption for that, is that they never explained this. I don't think they ever will, but maybe Diggle is just too stubborn or too righteous to believe that the Monitor is good just based off the Reset universe, so he had to go based off his wife to believe his wife, and also the events of this episode to then think that the Monitor is good, even though Oliver already thinks that. But another question that this episode brings up that I don't think will ever be answered is why Dinah, Roy, Renee, and the plutonium they were bringing weren't just put on Lian Yu by the Monitor like everybody else was. You have Oliver, Mia, William, Laurel, Diggle, and Lila, and also Connor Hawk. Why weren't Dinah, Roy, and Renee all just put on Lian Yu? And honestly, for that one, I don't really know the answer. Like, it might be that they were brought on a plane and weren't just put there already to advance the plot of the episode, maybe even advance the Monitor's plan or something, which is that them being hit out of the sky and crash landing separates Team Arrow. It also leads to Laurel and Oliver being captured or being attacked by Billy Wintergreen and Edward Fires, as well as Roy losing his arm. But I don't really understand what all of these things would be. I don't understand how any of these things would be important for the Monitor, especially Roy losing his arm, because Roy isn't even appearing in the crisis, it doesn't seem. But anyway, with the plane crashing out of the sky and the plutonium, as well as Donna, Roy, and Renee all being split into two different places, the Team Arrow splits into two different teams, or three actually, as William and Mia stay behind. The Diggle family, John Diggle, Lila Michaels, and Connor Hawk, all go to find Renee, Roy, and Dinah, while Oliver and Laurel go find the plutonium, which I gotta say, just Oliver and Laurel teaming up yet again, it's always so cool to see. It's just this season in particular, not only has it made Laurel a much better character, this is what Laurel or Black Canary should have been the entire time, and this is the ultimate version of Black Canary in the entirety of the Arrowverse. I mean, there have been a lot of versions, but this one I think takes all the best things from all the different Black Canaries, and you have this version. But also seeing Oliver and Laurel, Black Canary and the Green Arrow teaming up as much as they have in this season, and with nobody else around, it's just really cool to see. It's probably the closest we are ever going to get or ever got to a Green Arrow Black Canary relationship in this universe. Obviously, there was Oliver and Sarah in season 2 and Oliver and Laurel in season 1, but I mean, I think this is maybe a little bit closer because it's Oliver and Laurel and they're both Green Arrow and Black Canary. It's just, it's not, it's not an actual romantic relationship, but still, it's always really cool to see Oliver and Laurel teaming up. They're basically like a dynamic duo, or a duo that are like always teaming up in this season, and it's just really, really cool to see. So anyway, there's a scene with William and Mia where they talk about Oliver. Mia is still angry, and it's really annoying. Her whining in this episode, it really, I think, dragged down the episode a little bit. And again, it was resolved in the very next scene with Mia, where she was angry and whining yet again, but then William convinced her to stop being mad, which was fine, but it's just when it was happening, it was really frustrating, it was really annoying, and it dragged down the episode just a little bit. So Team Diggle are trying to find Donna, Renee, and Roy, and John and Lila are arguing a little about the Monitor, and also Lila talked to Connor a little bit, which was a pretty good scene, but then they find Donna and Renee, and they look so banged up, which makes sense. They were just in a plane crash, but I did not expect this plane crash to be so gruesome and bloody, and that goes tenfold for Roy, which a little later, Team Diggle, along with Dinah, find Roy, and his arm is completely crushed under a piece of the airplane, which once they said that his arm was crushed and he's pinned down and they don't have a lot of time to get him out of there, I immediately thought of Arsenal in the comics, or in Young Justice, the original Roy Harper, who was later cloned, but the original one, his arm was cut off, and in the comics, right before he became Arsenal, or while he was still Red Arrow, he got his arm cut off as well. It's something that happens to Roy quite a lot in a lot of continuities, not in the current continuity in the New 52, but in the pre-Flashpoint continuity and in Young Justice, that did happen. It did not seem like they were ever going to do that on Arrow, and honestly, they probably should have done it earlier, because Roy doesn't seem like he has many more appearances left, unless he also appears in Green Arrow and the Canaries, which is very possible, but again, that show does take place in the future, it seems, so I don't know, they probably should have done this earlier, but at the same time, it is definitely really interesting that they brought Roy back, and they cut off his arm. When that was happening, I just felt so bad for Roy, because everything he's gone through recently with the fact that he died like a couple of months ago, he was brought back to life, he has this bloodlust, and now also his arm is being cut off. I just felt so bad for him, but this was just very gruesome, very bloody, and they were going the Arsenal route, the cutting his arm off route, which they've done in the comics and Young Justice, which I'm hoping they do either explore in Green Arrow and the Canaries, or at least in the series finale of this show, but it just would have been really cool to see Arsenal with like a metal arm in the Crisis, but it does not seem like that is happening. Before that whole thing with Roy happened, I just said that because it was a part of the Diggle thing, and it went very naturally into that. But before that was happening, there was the Oliver and Laurel storyline, that part where they find the plutonium, but then are attacked by Edward Fires and Billy Wintergreen, which it is definitely pretty cool seeing them back. But in this episode, I don't really think Edward Fires was used to the most potential, because I thought he was a very good villain in season 1, and he could have been a great villain even in this just one episode, but he didn't really have very much dialogue. It was really just maybe like 3 or 4 lines of dialogue completely, and while it definitely was cool seeing him back and how they tied everything back to the season 1 flashbacks with Edward Fires, Billy Wintergreen, and even Yao Fei, I also think they maybe didn't use these characters to their full potential in this episode. And also, like I said, with Edward Fires and Billy Wintergreen, the same can kind of be said about Yao Fei. Whenever, like the one time we saw him return in previous seasons, in season 5, with that episode where Oliver is being tortured, we saw the ghost of Yao Fei, or the hallucination of Yao Fei. That was definitely really great. Bringing Yao Fei back can be pretty great, and he was pretty good in this episode. But just like the other characters, Billy Wintergreen, or less so Billy Wintergreen because he was never great, but Edward Fires, I don't think they were used to their full potential. So, while Oliver is trapped with Yao Fei, William and Mia have a talk, which is actually a pretty great scene. Like, not only is it a great development for both these characters, but the fact that it just ends Mia's whining probably forever about Oliver, but especially in this episode, definitely benefits the rest of the episode. But either way, without that, it is definitely a very good scene. Right after that, we have a talk between Roy and Diggle, and it's especially in this scene where I feel so bad for Roy, because, like I said earlier, all the things he's been through, he just lost his arm, and also because of how he's explaining how his whole time in Hub City wasn't great. He was definitely not happy. He'd rather be on Team Arrow, which, I mean, I would have preferred that too if he was just on Team Arrow the entire time. But also, it seems like there maybe is something different there, where he would rather not be alone. He'd rather be on the team, which sounds like he's not going to want to be on Lian Yu for the next 20 years, and maybe he's going to get over his bloodlust in some different way. Because of that, I do think that I really hope we see more of him in Green Arrow and the Canaries, which, again, does take place in 2040, but maybe there are flashbacks to the present day or something. Either way, I really want to see more of Roy Harper after Arrow ends. And also, this is one of the best scenes of the episode, and quite possibly the best acting we've ever gotten out of Colton Haynes, which, for the most part, I think, while he plays a very good Roy Harper, I don't think he ever really was a great actor on this show. However, I think this scene proves that he definitely is, and definitely can be, as he knocks it out of the park in this scene. It's a very emotional scene. I think it develops Roy so much more than he's been in the past, and again, I really just want to see more of him after Arrow ends on Green Arrow and the Canaries, but also, I definitely would have preferred an Arsenal TV show over Green Arrow and the Canaries any day. So Yao Fei and Oliver escape from their trap after Yao Fei tells Oliver that when he said sacrifice, or when he said survive all those years ago, at this point chronologically it would be 13 years ago, but in real life it would be 8 years ago in terms of television seasons. But he tells him that when he said survive, he didn't mean actually survive, he meant survive his legacy, what would remain after he's dead, which you could either call a retcon or a new opinion, a new use for the word, now that Oliver knows he has to sacrifice himself to save the multiverse. Because the actual word survive, the actual literal meaning, doesn't really apply to him anymore, and he can't really do that, which is, I think, a pretty good scene. And then Oliver, after he escapes, returns to the Argus base, which is the prison where Deathstroke and Captain Boomerang used to be, I'm pretty sure, and in this scene we learn how these dead characters are back. But honestly, this didn't really explain it very well, and I'm still pretty confused not only how, but why, and like how this all makes sense. Are they the actual dead people raised from the dead? Were they the skeletons and they got their bodies back, their consciousness back? Are they the same people? Are they ghosts? Are they manifestations of the Monitor? We don't know, and they never explain it. And honestly, it doesn't really make very much sense. Not only did this, I think, make it kind of difficult to take them seriously as threats, but also just watching it kind of took out the immersion, because I was confused for the most part. So that is, well, I said earlier there was only one thing, Mia's whining, that I didn't like about the episode, but honestly, it was that thing as well. And this thing might have been bigger, because for the rest of the episode, I was just so confused, and I didn't know what was going on with all of these dead characters and the fact that they're back. And then we get the final fight between Team Arrow and Edward Fires and all of his men, which, first of all, it starts with this team-up shot, which is obviously really cool. Like I said in my trailer breakdown, it's just always cool to see a team-up shot of any superhero group. For Team Arrow specifically, we've barely gotten any of that in the entirety of the 8 seasons, so now, even though Arsenal's not there, Yao Fei is, which feels a little bit out of place. The rest of the heroes who used to be on Team Arrow aren't there either, and Oliver Queen is all the way to the left, not in the middle. Other than all those nitpicks, it's definitely a really cool team-up shot, and the fight that follows, while I don't think being amazing or anything, was definitely pretty good and pretty exciting, but it all leads up to this device not working, the weapon that would get rid of all of the people and get rid of all the dead people. It doesn't work. Oliver tries to use it, that doesn't work. Harbinger then tries to use it, and it does, and this is when she becomes, or Lila becomes Harbinger. It's really cool, it's really exciting, and I think that Harbinger, like, I'm going to mention a little bit more how much Harbinger improved as a character, because I am recording this part after I'm recording the part right after this, because I did change something, but I think they really made Harbinger so cool, and they made her really fit the Crisis as much as they possibly can without changing her personality and character. But yeah, that was a great scene, or all those scenes were, for the most part, really good. Which was awesome, but I think what's even better than that, I think my favorite part of this episode in particular is Oliver saying goodbye to everybody he's saying goodbye to. He says goodbye to Renee and Dinah initially, which is a great scene, to Roy, which, I mean, was a little disappointing because I really wanted more screen time between Oliver and Roy, not only in this episode, but in the season, because that was like the only scene where they talked to each other at all in the season. Anyway, also talking to William, which is a great scene, talking to Diggle, which is an amazing scene, and even talking to Mia, which is definitely maybe the most likable Mia has ever been, which is in this scene, and it was like the only moment in this entire season, in the entire last 2 seasons, where I felt like maybe Green Arrow and the Canaries could be watchable, maybe Mia could be a good main character, and this moment really felt like Oliver passing the torch of the Green Arrow to Mia, and it felt like in that moment, Mia became the Green Arrow. But another thing that happened in that moment was the Crisis began. And of course, the ending, the Crisis begins. I love the idea that both Barry and Oliver were talking to their loved ones about the fact that they're going to die in the exact same moment, at the exact same time, in 2 different places in the world, like across the planet, right before the Crisis began, which was just so cool. However, in the Arrow episode, Harbinger appears and recruits Oliver along with Mia, which that didn't happen in the Flash episode, but this definitely makes more sense because Harbinger's role, Harbinger becoming Harbinger, or Lila becoming Harbinger, happened in this episode, but obviously in fashion with Arrow Season 8, not only are characters just so great, like Harbinger herself, along with Laurel, the future characters, Felicity, they were all so much better in this season compared to any other season previously, but also in true Season 8 fashion, the ending of the episode is insane, and this is no exception. And in conclusion, just like literally every other episode in Season 8, this episode was great, and while I do think I would say it's one of the weaker episodes of Season 8 that really isn't saying much at all, it's the complete opposite of Season 4. This episode is really good, despite being, I think, not as good as certain other episodes in this season. I did have certain problems, like Mia's storyline for the most part was a little frustrating. The whole thing where the dead people came back, it wasn't really explained well, but those are not really that much of a problem, as everything else was really good. So I'll give this episode a 9 out of 10. Again, pretty great, but not as good as certain other episodes in this season. But I gotta say, with these 7 episodes, basically completing the season, as the next 3 episodes, you have a crossover, backdoor pilot, and series finale. They're not really parts of this season for the most part. I think this is, we could say, one of the greats of Arrow for the longest time, basically for the entirety of this channel's existence. The greats of Arrow were seasons 1, 2, and 5. We got 2 seasons in a row where only 7 episodes of those seasons, which is the prison storyline in season 7, I think was great, but then even then, looking back, they're not really as good as I thought they were because of all the side storylines. But I think that we can say now, Arrow has added yet another season to its catalog of greats, just like The Flash has added another villain, Bloodwork, to its catalog of great villains. Here, Arrow adds a 4th season to its great season, so now you have season 1, season 2, season Season 5 and Season 8, and it's only really Season 4 that I think is bad, and maybe like this first half of Season 6, maybe the second half of Season 7 as well, but for the most part, I think that Arrow has a lot more positive than it has negative. But anyway, if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.